It had been a rough couple of months leading up to that fateful day. My mind was clouded with the remains of a failed marriage, and I drowned my sorrows in too many pints of ale. Scotland was supposed to be my escape, a chance to clear my head and find peace in its rugged landscapes. Instead, I wandered from village to village, lost in alcohol and fleeting conversations. The weight of what I left behind in Boston made me question if abandoning everything, my job, my wife, my life, was the right choice. But that day changed everything. It shook me out of my stupor and forced me to confront my reality and who I was. The night before had been like the others. Too many drinks and memories I'd rather forget. I stumbled back to a small, unfamiliar room and passed out, not caring what the morning would bring. I had no idea it would start with a jolt that would change everything. "Wake up! Get up! It's an emergency. The captain's having a heart attack." Someone was shaking me violently. "Where am I? What the hell?" I muttered. "Quick, get up. You're a doctor, right? The captain's having a heart attack. You have to come quickly." Hands pulled me from the bed. I got up and realized I had no shoes on. No time to worry about that. They pulled me down the hall to an office where a woman in a police uniform was trying to give CPR to a large man also in uniform. Oh crap, I finally realized. I was in a police station. I knelt down and checked for a pulse and breathing. Nothing. "Do you have a defibrillator?" I asked the woman doing CPR. "I think so. I'll get it," she said, and ran off. I started chest compressions, trying to push through the fog of the ale still in my system. She returned with an AED, and I hoped it was in working order. "Get the pads out and turn it on," I instructed. I ripped open the captain's shirt, attached the pads, and turned on the AED. It instructed me to step back. I pressed the button. Zap! His body jerked, but nothing. I tried again. Zap! Still nothing. Damn it. Third time. Zap! Finally, the machine announced a normal rhythm. Thank God. I sighed, checking his weak but present heartbeat. "Did you call an ambulance?" I shouted to the policewoman. She mumbled something. "Do it now," I urged. She grabbed her phone while I monitored the captain's pulse and breathing. I realized I was in a police station trying to recall how I got there. Slowly, I remembered getting drunk at a pub the night before. It was just past 7 o'clock in the morning and I had sobered up quickly. A few minutes later, the policewoman returned, saying the ambulance would take another 30 minutes. It was coming from Langholm. My heart was racing, a mix of panic and last night's booze. I needed to use the bathroom. I turned to the policewoman nearby. "Come over here and put your hand on his chest," I instructed her. She sat down and placed her hand on the captain's chest. "I can feel his heart," she said. "Stay there while I use the bathroom." "Where is it?" I asked. She pointed around the corner. I made my way to the bathroom and relieved myself. When I stepped back into the hallway, I noticed a few other officers had arrived. I approached a young constable. "Where the hell am I?" I asked him. "You're in a police station," he replied. "I may have had too much to drink last night. What town is this? And how did I get here?" I questioned further. "You're in Braymore. Dan and I brought you here after you passed out at the pub. You had a great time before you collapsed," he smiled. "Great," I groaned. "You told everyone I ran away from a mess." The young constable grinned. "Well, sort of." In the distance, I heard the ambulance approaching. "So you're from the States? Is that true?" he asked. I grimaced. "Unfortunately, yes. They also said you were a doctor," he continued, more as a question than a statement. I nodded. "Yes." The ambulance crew rushed in and headed straight to the office where the captain lay on the floor. After checking his heart and breathing, my job was done. I watched them load him onto a stretcher and take him to the ambulance, likely bound for the hospital in Langholm. I then searched for my boots and jacket, finding them beside the bunk where I'd crashed the night before. I asked a nearby policewoman if I could leave, and she silently nodded. I sat down, pulled on my boots, and unrolled my jacket, checking that my wallet and phone were still in the pockets. When I returned to the main office, I noticed everyone standing or sitting, staring at me in silence. It seemed any trouble I'd caused at the pub had been forgiven, but I started to feel a bit dizzy. "Does anyone know where I'm staying?" I asked. All 4 of them looked in the same direction, and I learned I was staying in a boarding house just a few hundred yards from the station. As I made my way there, I took deep breaths to clear my head. I needed sleep, a hot shower, coffee, and food in that order. I bought a large bottle of water on the way and downed it in one gulp. When I reached the guest house, the kind lady who ran it greeted me back after a night of fun at the pub. "Would you like some breakfast?" "I've got roast potatoes ready," she offered. "Coffee would be great." "I may have overdone it last night," I admitted. "I heard. When you didn't come back after the pub closed, I called the police. They said you'd had a bit too much to drink and were safely tucked in one of their beds, so I went to bed myself." She smiled and went to prepare food. The smell made me realize how hungry I was. Her husband came in and smiled. "You've had a busy day for a Saturday," he said. "Huh?" I replied, confused. He grinned. The captain called and told me what you did for him. You saved his life. Mary, come here. We've got a hero staying with us. What's this, Bill? She asked as she ran in. He saved Greg's life, had a heart attack in his office, and this young man brought him back. He's a doctor from the U.S., Bill explained. I tried to downplay it. It was nothing, really. Nothing, my back, Bill said. He did CPR and used that electronic thing to restart Greg's heart. They looked at me expecting more details, but all I wanted was coffee and breakfast. Could I get some coffee, please? I asked. She nodded and soon returned with a pot of coffee and a cup. I drank nearly the whole pot along with a big plate of food, scrambled eggs, ham, fried tomatoes, beans, and toast. Everything was delicious. I figured Captain Greg had probably eaten too many of these hearty Scottish breakfasts over the years, leading to his heart attack. After eating, I headed to my room, took a long hot shower, and lay down to get my life back in order. Let me tell you a bit about myself. My name is James Carter. I'm 36 years old, 5'11" and 185 pounds with brown hair and green eyes. I work as an orthopedic surgeon in Boston, where I completed my surgical residency 3 years ago at Harvard Medical School. I was married to Natalie Carter, an elementary school teacher. She's 35, also from Boston, and still has family there. My parents retired to a beach town in Florida last year for the warm weather and to play golf. My brother Kevin lives in Connecticut with his wife, Jenna, and their 2 daughters, Lucy and Mia. My parents love spoiling their grandkids, especially when they visit the beach. So, how did I end up in Scotland? Fair question. Last night at the pub, I vented too much about my problems, and now I'm sure the whole town knows my story. Her name was Natalie Carter. Nat to everyone. I said things I probably shouldn't have, but too much ale acts like a truth serum. I left Boston a month ago when my marriage fell apart, and for the past 3 weeks I've been traveling around Scotland on a Yamaha dirt bike I bought in Edinburgh. I sold or donated most of my stuff back home, only keeping what I could fit in my car. A friend who'd been through something similar gave me some advice before I left. Natalie comes from a big family, 2 brothers and a sister. Her parents are retired and live comfortably in Boston. But as a doctor, I've led a different life. Long hours, little personal time that took its toll on my marriage. My friend Dave Walters went through the same thing and left his cheating wife. He later remarried and found happiness with a wonderful woman from Germany. Unfortunately, infidelity seems all too common among doctors' spouses. Natalie and I were married for 5 years, but a few months ago she had a baby, a biracial child who clearly wasn't mine. The truth hit me like a punch to the gut in the delivery room. I was holding Nat's hand, ready to cut the umbilical cord when the baby was born. The doctor's shocked expression said it all. I was stunned, and the reality set in as the baby was handed to Nat. I walked out of the room and never spoke to her again. Nat's parents tried to reach out, leaving several messages. Her mother even asked if I could forgive Nat and be a father to the baby. I asked her, "Could you?" She had no answer, and that was the last time I spoke to them. Getting pregnant by another man isn't something you can just brush off with an apology. As I left the hospital, I made sure the birth certificate listed the father's name as unknown, signed it, and walked away. Once home, I packed what I needed into my old Subaru Outback, some clothes, my iPad, a few things from medical school, and left. I didn't take much. I left my wedding ring on the kitchen table and checked into a hotel near the hospital where I worked. It was a different one from where Nat had given birth. I was still in a daze. The next day, which marked my first full day in Braemore at the pub, after getting drunk and venting about my problems, I met several locals. First, Mrs. McGregor came to the boarding house to thank me for saving her husband, whom she called useless. But that's another story. She offered to help me in any way she could, and I told her I'd check on the captain at the hospital in a day or 2. Next, the mayor of Braemore visited with a couple of local officials, curious to meet the American doctor who saved Captain McGregor's life. The mayor, a rather masculine woman in her late 50s, played the politician well. We took a few photos for some official record, and she asked what brought me to this quiet part of Scotland. I told her about my family's roots, tracing back to the Highland clearances and how my great-grandfather settled in Boston. I mentioned that this was my first visit to Scotland and that I planned to explore the Isle of Skye and Loch Ness next. The mayor then asked about my profession. I explained that I'm an orthopedic surgeon specializing in bone and joint repair with some general surgery experience. The boarding house owners, Mary and Bill, nodded as if they were suddenly experts in surgery. The mayor then asked if I'd be returning to work in Boston soon, to which I replied that I'd quit the hospital and was taking a break here in Scotland. Concerned glances were exchanged. A female constable, the same one who had tried to resuscitate Captain McGregor, was there too. I praised her efforts, saying she would have done just fine without me. She blushed, and everyone laughed. The mayor then asked to speak with me privately in her office about an important matter. Though I had no idea what she wanted to discuss, I agreed to meet her the next morning. After they left, I felt a bit puzzled by the whole situation. Scotland is very different from the US. The landscape is incredibly lush, especially in the summer, and by September, with the tourists mostly gone, the roads were quieter. I took my time exploring small villages, enjoying the friendly people, good food, and cold beer. Ale, the national drink, is like Scottish mother's milk. I spent that day resting at the boarding house and, after lunch, took a walk. The sleep I got after Mrs. McGregor and the mayor's visits was much needed. That evening, I limited myself to just 1 pint of beer with dinner. The next morning, I got up early, had breakfast, and headed to the mayor's office. I was greeted by a woman who seemed to be expecting me. "You must be the American doctor," she said. I nodded. "The mayor will be here shortly. Please have a seat." I sat down, waiting for the mayor, and started thinking about my plans for the day. "Dr. Carter, the mayor is here. Come in," I was eventually told. "Thank you." I entered, greeted the mayor, and took a seat on the couch. Coffee was ordered, and after some small talk, she asked, "Did you have a good evening, Dr. Carter?" "Yes, it was quiet. I had dinner at the pub and apologized to the owner for my behavior on Friday," I explained. "I was going through a rough time and had too much to drink. He was very kind, even bought me dinner and a beer as thanks for helping Captain McGregor." The mayor nodded, and I added, "I'll be leaving later today, if that's your concern." "Oh, that's not why I asked you here," she replied. Confused, I asked, "Then what did you want to discuss?" "Dr. Carter, I have a problem I need your help with," she said. "What could I possibly help with in Braymore?" I asked, puzzled. "Well, Dr. Carter, you're a doctor without a current contract in the U.S., and Braymore is a town that needs a doctor, at least temporarily, until the government in Edinburgh sends a replacement for Dr. Wallace, who retired and moved to Australia." "Are you asking me to be the local doctor?" I asked, still unsure. "Yes, that's the proposal. We desperately need a doctor. The nearest one is almost an hour away in Langholm. We have many people who would be grateful if you could help us out for a few weeks. The Department of Health says they will send someone, but it might take some time. I'm not sure I'm the right fit. I'm a surgeon, and it sounds like you need a family doctor," I said, uncertain. "Dr. Carter, right now we need any doctor we can get. You're exactly who we need," she insisted. "I'm not sure," I hesitated. "Please think about it, but don't take too long. We really need you," she urged. I spent hours on the phone with the officials in Edinburgh responsible for assigning doctors across the country. They informed me it could be a year or more before we get another doctor in the area. Dr. Wallace, now in his 80s and struggling with memory issues, has moved to Australia to live with his daughter and her husband, likely not far from a nursing home. So, I started looking into the American doctor who ended up in our town. It's impressive what the police can dig up when they're motivated. In just one night, they compiled a quick dossier on Dr. Carter. I found out he graduated in the top third of his class from a medical school in New York State and is a board-certified surgeon. I also learned a bit about his personal life and sympathized with how terribly his wife treated him, which explains why he got drunk at the pub. Now I need to figure out an incentive to convince him to stay with us for a few months. I have a plan in mind and have already secured urgent permission from the Department of Health for Dr. James Carter to practice medicine in Scotland. I saw Dr. Carter leaving the mayor's office and headed toward him. I was off duty, so I wasn't in uniform but dressed in my best casual outfit, a white blouse, skinny jeans, and high-heeled boots. My hair was done, and I had some makeup on. I wanted to look my best. I'm 29, about 5'7", and in great shape from running regularly. "Dr. Carter," I called out. He turned to see who was calling him. I walked over and greeted him, extending my hand. "Good morning, Dr. Carter. It's nice to see you. We haven't officially met. I'm Sarah Kelly, the constable who assisted you with Captain McGregor." Oh my God, I thought. Police uniforms really do disguise people. I wouldn't have recognized this woman if she hadn't introduced herself. Our first encounter was chaotic at the police station, and when I saw her at the boarding house, she was in uniform. Plus, I was pretty hungover at the time. But now, seeing Sarah, she's gorgeous with shoulder-length blonde hair, a beautiful face, and a perfect figure. I must have been too distracted before to notice. "Dr. Carter!" she called out again. I turned to see who was speaking. She approached me and said, "Good morning, Dr. Carter. It's nice to meet you here." She extended her hand. "I'm Sarah Kelly, the constable who helped when you rescued Captain McGregor." My brain struggled to respond, and I stammered, Well, I haven't decided on my plans yet. I might visit Captain McGregor in the hospital and then drive around the Isle of Skye." She smiled. "I'm headed to Langholm to see Greg. Would you like to come with me?" How could I resist? "I don't want to impose," I said. "Don't worry. I'd be happy to have your company," she replied. We walked to her car. a VW Golf. Driving on the left side of the road felt strange, but on a motorcycle, it wasn't as wild. The 45-minute drive to Langholm passed in a blur. I was too focused on talking with Sarah. I learned she grew up in Braemore. Her father was a local barrister, and she lives in an apartment in town. She's 29, plans to go to law school, and is currently single. She was once engaged to a semi-pro rugby player who left for France, ending their relationship. We visited Captain McGregor briefly. He had heard from his wife and others that I'd saved his life. He vowed to give up fried food and beer, lose weight, and start running. Sarah later told me an inspector warned Greg he'd be forced into early retirement if he didn't shape up, so his wife would be pushing him to exercise. Langholm isn't the biggest town, but with 2 hospitals, it's considered significant for the area. It's a town of about 18,000 people in Dumfries and Galloway. Edinburgh is 3 hours north, and Glasgow is about 2 hours west. I offered to buy lunch in exchange for a walking tour, and Sarah agreed. She knew Langholm well since her father often worked at the courthouse there. She studied political science at Edinburgh University, focusing on EU defense policy and international relations. At lunch, I anticipated the usual questions. What's an American doing in Scotland on a motorcycle? Where did you grow up? What about your family? We chatted, but neither of us brought up my wife or what I had said at the pub that night. I had a great day with Sarah, but never made it to the Isle of Skye. Back in Braemore, she dropped me off at the guest house, and I thanked her for the ride and the tour. I knew I'd likely see more of Constable Sarah Kelly, and I looked forward to it. 2 days later, I finally took the trip around the Isle of Skye. The countryside was breathtaking. I got up early, had a quick snack, and set off on my bike. I rode to Inverary, then Fort William, where I stopped for gas and coffee, accompanied by delicious pastries. Following Bill's advice from the guest house, I drove clockwise around the isle to avoid getting stuck behind tourist buses. The day was incredible, filled with stops to take in the stunning scenery. I focused solely on the present moment, not letting anything else distract me. Scotland is truly beautiful. No day in Scotland is complete without rain, and as I drove back, it started pouring. I stopped under a tree to wait it out, sipping a soda, when I heard a loud crash nearby. A cloud of smoke was rising from a wrecked car. I quickly threw my bottle into the ditch, put on my helmet, and rode over to the crash site, about 400 meters away. A minibus and a passenger car had collided head-on. Seeing the badly wrecked car with smoke coming from the engine, I knew the passengers needed to get out before a fire started. The driver's door was jammed, but the back door had opened on impact. I climbed inside and found a bleeding man behind the wheel and an unconscious woman in the passenger seat. Both had pulses, so I shouted to bystanders to call 999 and request 4 ambulances. While a man used a fire extinguisher to control the smoke, I assessed the situation in the minibus. The driver had cuts and lacerations from shattered glass, and the elderly passengers were in shock. One woman appeared to have a broken collarbone from the seatbelt, but she was more concerned about her brother-in-law, who had a history of cancer. Despite the chaos, they were all talkative, which was a good sign. Back at the car, some people brought blankets to keep the injured warm. The man had a compound fracture in his leg, so I applied a tourniquet to stop the bleeding. With the help of others, we carefully extracted the man and woman from the car and laid them on the road. It felt like ages before the ambulances arrived, as they had to come from Langholm. I used a first aid kit to bandage the minibus driver's wounds. His name was Fergus, a retired accountant who worked part-time as a driver. When the ambulances finally arrived, the paramedics took over, and I followed them to the hospital to ensure they had all the necessary information. At the hospital, one of the paramedics recognized me as the American doctor who saved the police captain in Braemore. After checking on the accident victims and speaking with the emergency doctor, I headed back to Braemore. By the time I reached the guest house, it was dark. I was greeted by Bill and Mary at the door. "Oh, you're back, Dr. Carter," Bill said. "Hi, Bill." "Hi, Mary," I greeted them. "Yeah, I'm a bit later than planned. I'm going to clean up and find some food. Hopefully there's a place around here that serves something not deep-fried." "Actually," Mary replied, "there's an Italian place about 1 kilometer from here near the market. But just so you know, some reporters from Fort William were here looking for you a few minutes ago." I frowned. "What did they want?" "They heard you were in an accident," Mary explained. "No, I just stopped to help at a car accident, that's all," I clarified. Bill, who had been listening, suddenly spoke up with wide eyes and a smile. "Well, they think you saved 7 people's lives single-handedly. I just gave some first aid," I said modestly. "They're in the hospital in Langholm now, and they'll be fine." Bill pointed toward the door. "The reporters are waiting for you at the pub. They want to interview you." He then grabbed his hat and dashed out. Mary looked at me, adding, "He told them he'd bring them back when you returned. They're eager to talk to you." "Great," I sighed. All I wanted right now was to eat, have a glass of wine, take a hot shower, and get some sleep. I smiled at Mary. Mary. I'm heading to the pub then. I walked out the door, but I wasn't really going to the pub. I headed in the opposite direction to the restaurant, hoping to eat before the reporters found me. I was partially successful and got some food before they caught up with me. Bill seemed to be leading the search party. Jim needed to reach his client, James, who he knew was somewhere in Scotland. He had James's cell number, which started with +44, definitely a UK number. Jim had some news to share and needed to know what James wanted to do next. He decided to call him. James? Where are you? Jim asked. In Scotland, man, James replied. Where exactly? Jim inquired further. A small town in the southwest called Braymore on the coast, James explained. Jim got straight to the point. I've got some news, and it's not what you want to hear. Natalie's refusing to cooperate with the divorce. She says if you come home and meet the baby, you'll get over your pain, and everything will be fine. James's response was immediate. She can forget it. She needs to find someone else to be the father. It won't be me. Yeah, that's not going to happen, Jim countered. I had my investigator check out the baby's father. It's the gym teacher at the high school near where Natalie teaches. He's also the rugby coach. James sounded uninterested. I don't care who he is. Jim pressed on, knowing the importance of the situation. Here's the thing. He's married with 2 kids. He's not in a position to support Natalie or her child. So what does this have to do with me? I'm not going back to play the clueless husband and father, James said, his frustration clear. Jim sighed, delivering the next piece of bad news. Well, she wants child support. James was incredulous. Is she serious? Jim confirmed. Yes, James needed to know his odds. What are the chances I'll have to pay? Jim answered cautiously. It's uncertain. Paternity shouldn't be an issue, but courts often presume that a child born during a marriage is the husband's, unless you get your parental rights terminated. James didn't hesitate. Do that. Go to court and get my rights terminated. I filled out the birth certificate as father unknown, so make sure that hasn't changed. I will, Jim promised. I don't recommend you go home right now. It could give her lawyer a chance to drag you into court and push for payment, James reassured him. Don't worry, I'm staying here for now. Scotland is beautiful. Jim, you should take a vacation, have a beer, enjoy the scenery. Jim smiled at the thought, but declined. Thanks, but my clients need me too much. Maybe next year. Take care, James. Later, Jim, James said before hanging up. Stupid woman thinks I'll just do whatever she wants. Not going to happen. She made her choices, and she can live with them. I refuse to stay married to someone who disrespected me so much that she got pregnant by another man and expects me to be okay with it. No way. The mayor of Braymore showed up soon after. There he is. Didn't have to wait long, she said. Good morning, Madam Mayor, I said, not thrilled to see her. You're a real hero, she said, smiling. Oh, how's that? I asked, unsure of what she meant. You saved 7 people in that car accident. Don't be modest. You're all over the news this morning. It wasn't that bad. 3 of them got out on their own. One has a broken collarbone and another has mostly cuts. The passengers in the car were hurt the worst, but they'll recover. Well, no one was lost, and that's what matters. Now I need some coffee and more sightseeing. Have you thought about my offer? I spoke to Edinburgh, and they're willing to give you a 1-year temporary license to practice here. Braymore needs you, doctor. Please stay and help us, she asked, almost pleading. I'll explore the area some more and let you know when I get back. How about that? Fair enough, but please think about the impact you could have here. We're a small town, but we're a good one, and we need you, she said earnestly. I nodded. I'll think about it, I replied, then walked away. I needed to clear my head, and riding my bike was the best way to do that. My problems in Boston might convince me to stay for a while, even if just for 6 months, giving Edinburgh time to find a permanent doctor. We'll see. I started my motorcycle and rode toward Fort William, looking for a place to eat and think. After talking to Jim, I was pretty sure going back to Natalie wasn't in my plans. Every day I stayed away gave her more time to think about what she'd done, if she even cared. But one thing was certain. I wasn't going back to her. Lunch was great, and the ride was smooth. On my way back to Braymore, my phone started buzzing. I pulled over to check it. Jim had texted, sending you a link to a TV news article. You're a hero. His voicemail said, Dude, you saved lives in Scotland. You're all over the news. I'll send you the video. Call me later. There was also a voicemail from Sarah. James, I know you're out riding, but call me when you get back. Back in Braymore, I went to my room at the boarding house. Mary offered to make tea, but I declined. I showered, changed, and headed to the mayor's office to request a meeting. The secretary smiled as she called the mayor. So, Dr. Carter, have you decided? She asked, clearly anxious. I've decided to stay in Braymore and help with the doctor shortage, I said. She hugged me so tightly I almost couldn't breathe. Jane, you won't regret this, she said excitedly, dropping the formalities. Not so fast, Mayor. There are conditions. Her expression shifted slightly as she realized this wasn't entirely in her control. And what would those be, James? She asked, trying to hide her concern. Nothing too big, I said, holding up my hands. I listed my conditions, and she nodded, taking notes. When I finished, I asked, So, do you still want me? Oh yes, everything on this list is doable. Most of it is already in place. You just need to start practicing. In small towns, good news spreads fast and bad news even faster. The mayor announced that James had agreed to stay on as the district doctor, and within a day, word spread like wildfire. Soon, a line of patients was waiting to see him at the office. Dr. Wallace's patient records were still stored there, and since the nurse had retired, the building was locked to keep things secure. The mayor hired a young secretary for James, a recent high school graduate looking for work. The local traveling nurse practitioner, who used to visit half a day a week, could now come more frequently with James around. Laura, the nurse practitioner, is about 35 years old and divorced with a 4-year-old daughter. Her ex-husband works as a manager for a shipping company in Edinburgh and had a wandering eye which led to their split. Laura moved to Fort William for a job and lives near Braymore. She's a tall, attractive blonde, though a bit heavier than me. I might need to keep an eye on her if she gets too close. Oh my God, this office smells musty. It needs a good airing out and a thorough cleaning. If I find dead bugs or mouse droppings, well, I'll just clean it up, Nicole said as she stepped inside, wrinkling her nose at the stale air. Nicole, the new administrator, had just graduated, and this was her first real job. She still wore braces, and her mom, clearly proud and excited, had brought her lunch. Her mother, dressed up for the occasion, looked to be in her early 40s, eager to make a good impression. My first task was to get the office in order. I made an inventory list, arranged for deliveries, and logged into the health department system. But then it hit me. I didn't even have a stethoscope or the authority to write prescriptions yet. It would take a few days to get everything in place, though it seemed the locals were expecting immediate action. Then it happened. Dr. Carter! Dr. Carter! Nicole yelled from the front. What is it? I called back. You need to come out here now. Why? What's going on? Just come, quickly. I hurried to the waiting area and saw a man with his arm wrapped in a towel, his face pale, and a woman standing beside him. She handed me a plastic bag, and through the clear plastic, I could see what looked like a severed finger inside. He cut his finger off in the tractor engine, the woman said, her voice edged with panic. This was my first real patient in Scotland. I guided them to the exam room and told Nicole to call the hospital in Langholm to arrange for reattachment and to get an ambulance. With only basic supplies at hand, I stabilized the man's wound and prepared him for transport. His pinky and ring finger were missing. The ring finger was in the bag, nestled in some ice. After an hour, the patient was on his way to the hospital, and I had managed to stabilize him despite the limited resources available. Later, the regional nurse practitioner, Laura, dropped by briefly. She was busy and didn't stay long, but she handed me her business card. Nicole mentioned that Laura was a single mom living nearby, something I made a note of for future reference. I also needed a place to live. The boarding house wasn't bad, but I wanted my own space. A small, furnished one-bedroom with a decent kitchen and a spot for my motorcycle. I reached out to a real estate agent, Josephine Landers, and within an hour, she had found the perfect 500-square-foot apartment for me. In small towns, news travels fast, and she had already prepared everything. The apartment had plenty of windows, a great view, and even a balcony. Josephine had thought of everything, right down to the linens and towels. We have stores in town that can get you anything you need, she said with a welcoming smile. Later, I thanked Mary and Bill at the boarding house and moved my belongings to the new apartment. I set up my bedding, stocked the fridge, and even bought a bottle of wine, though I don't usually drink it. As I settled in, there was a knock at the door. Josephine pulled into the station and reported, "Everything's ready, here's the address." She handed me a card with the apartment James was renting. I tucked it in my pocket and went home to freshen up after my shift. After a shower to wash off the day, I put on tight jeans, a sleeveless blouse, and some eye makeup, then headed out. I called a Chinese place, ordered some food, picked it up, and drove to the address Josephine gave me. I rang the bell. After a couple of minutes, I heard, "Hello? How can I help you?" I laughed. "Police! Open up! What the—" I heard. The door opened, so I walked in and went up the stairs. "We heard someone might have broken in, so I came to check," I said playfully. He smiled. "Do you always bring food for trespassers?" "Only the ones I like," I replied with a grin. Waking up in someone else's bed, I realized I was in my new temporary apartment, and I wasn't alone. I checked the time on my phone. It was time to get moving. I gently nudged my partner, Sarah. "I have to go," she yawned. "What time is it?" 6:39. "I need to get cleaned up and head to work." I went to the washroom, used the toilet, and turned on the shower. Sarah joined me a moment later. That's where it all began. Why can't people see the obvious? Because they don't want to. Natalie refuses to accept that I am done with her. Her affair with a teacher who's also a rugby coach ended our marriage, especially when she had his child. Is that so hard to understand? But she still won't admit that I'm finished with her. I filed the divorce papers and sent copies to her, advising her to have her attorney review them so we could settle the details. It's a simple divorce, but she's determined to drag it out, which will only increase her legal fees. Leaving the country shows my intent, and the Edinburgh Supreme Court has a divorce hearing scheduled for next week. I've got DNA evidence and photos to prove the child isn't mine, and I'm seeking a court order to require the real father to provide a DNA sample, which would delay any child support claims against me. Natalie suggested marriage counseling, but it requires both parties' consent, and I'm not interested. She also demanded my location and contact info, which I refused to give, citing attorney-client privilege. Her lawyer threatened to take me to court over it, but that won't work. Natalie even showed up at my office with the baby, convinced I would be a great father. The baby looked like any other toddler, except she's clearly not mine. I'm considering having the baby brought to court so the judge can see for themselves. Natalie's real motive for wanting me back is money. The child's father, a teacher and rugby coach, has a wife and kids, and he's not wealthy. They live on a teacher's salary and his wife's income as a business manager at a small dealership. They're not rich and are just getting by with their mortgage, bills, and 2 cars. Natalie wants my income, but she won't get it. I have already walked away from everything. She hasn't realized that yet. She has the house, the car, and everything in it. She can sell it all and move into a smaller place if she wants. The house is in foreclosure, but I signed away my rights to it. When it's sold, there should be enough for a decent down payment on a modest condo. This is all about money for her. Laura Tompkins was deep in thought, planning her visit to see the new American doctor, James Carter. Mayor Braymore had persuaded Carter to stay and replace Dr. Wallace, who had finally retired after making one too many serious mistakes that had occasionally harmed patients. Everyone was relieved that Wallace was gone. Laura had already met James Carter. He was attractive and not just an ordinary general practitioner. He was a surgeon. Word about him had spread quickly, especially concerning the drama with his almost ex-wife. The mayor had even ordered a background check, and the medical staff in Edinburgh confirmed his credentials. The unmarried women in the area were already flocking to his office, often with minor ailments that conveniently required undressing for an exam. Despite her busy schedule with work and her daughter, Laura planned to make time to visit his office under the pretext of discussing patient care challenges. It would give her a chance to be alone with him, and she intended to dress nicely for the occasion. As she was driving to her next patient, her phone rang. She answered through the car's system. "Hello?" Laura said. "Hi, is this Laura Tompkins?" a male voice asked. "Yes, who's calling?" she replied. "Good morning. I'm James Carter, the temporary physician in Braymore," he introduced himself. "Dr. Carter, how can I help you?" Laura responded, a few ideas already forming in her mind. "I was hoping we could meet to discuss the local health needs," James said. "I'm only here for a few months until a permanent doctor arrives, but I'm concerned about not knowing how things are usually done. I could use some guidance." "Sure. It would be great to talk. When's a good time for you?" she asked. "Whenever you're available," James answered. "I'll make time. This is important to me." Laura said, pausing to think. "I'm driving right now, but I'll call you later to arrange a time that works for both of us. Sound good?" "That sounds perfect. I really appreciate your help," James replied. As the call ended, Laura began to form a plan. It might take some time to see it through, but she was patient. And who knows, maybe James Carter had something in mind too. Time would tell. My secretary is overwhelmed with calls from people wanting to see the doctor. They even wait outside the office when I arrive in the morning. Most of the patients are women, and I'm thinking they might be more comfortable with a female doctor. Nurse practitioner Laura Tompkins might be a better fit for many of them, especially for routine issues. I'll call her and see if we can work together more effectively. 2 days later, Laura invited me to her house for dinner. I couldn't turn down a home-cooked meal, so I went. It was a short walk, and I brought a bottle of red and white wine, not knowing her preference. When I knocked, a little girl answered the door looking about 3 or 4 years old with a mix of curiosity and surprise. She turned and yelled, "Mommy, that American is here!" "Dr. Carter, please come in." Laura greeted me warmly with her daughter standing shyly beside her. Laura, around 35 years old, about 5'6", with long dark hair and a slim figure, looked stunning. I stood there momentarily stunned until I remembered the wine I brought. "Hello, I'm James. And who are you?" I asked the little girl. Her face brightened. "My name is Sophie. I'm 4 and my favorite book is Winnie the Pooh." "Nice to meet you, Sophie. Tigger's my favorite," I said, handing the wine to Laura. Laura smiled and said, "Mrs. Billings knows her wine. Could you open the white and pour us a glass unless you prefer beer?" "Wine is fine," I said, opening the bottle while Sophie watched me closely. "Are you drinking wine?" I asked her jokingly. Laura laughed. No, silly, kids drink juice. I'll have orange juice, please, Sophie said. Laura prepared dinner, smiling all the while. I offered to help, but was instead entertained by Sophie, who insisted I help color her farm animals. When I tried to color a pig red, she corrected me firmly. Pigs are beige, not red. Dinner was beef stew with fresh cookies, and we drank more wine. Later, Sophie was sent to put on her pajamas and brush her teeth. She returned and announced I was going to read her a bedtime story, Winnie the Pooh. Laura nodded, and Sophie brought a book. While I read to her in the living room, Laura tidied up the kitchen. Watching her, I thought, this is what a real family feels like. This is real life. James was quickly won over by my daughter. She may be small, but she's great at charming even the toughest. However, she couldn't win over her father. I don't usually invite men into my home, much less share dinner with me and my daughter. But this time was different. I already had a good sense of who James was, thanks to various sources and his actions since arriving here. The fact that he was escaping an unfaithful wife made him relatable. He understood the pain I had felt. I packed up Sophie and left her father in Edinburgh because I couldn't tolerate his disrespect. He didn't want a daughter or the responsibility of a family, which was his loss. I also knew I had competition in Sarah Kelly. She's younger and prettier, and she's good with men. But in a direct competition, I had an advantage. I knew what Dr. James Carter was looking for, and the way he looked while reading to Sophie said it all. Dinner with Laura was excellent, and meeting Sophie was intriguing. I returned to my apartment around midnight, took a shower, and went to bed. If the past few days were any indication, tomorrow would be busy. Just as I settled into bed, my phone rang. The call came from a US number, but it was marked as unknown. I thought about ignoring it, but worried it might be my parents, so I answered, "Hi, James, is that you?" Nat's voice was instantly recognizable, and I immediately regretted picking up. "Natalie, if you have something to say, go through Jim. I don't want to talk to you," I replied, my tone firm. "James, please don't hang up. Let me talk," she pleaded. "Natalie, there's nothing left to discuss. You've said it all. Goodbye," I said, ending the call and blocking the number without hesitation. "I've heard I have competition for Dr. Carter's attention. Nurse Hottie is in the running. She's attractive and charming, but I have the edge of not being previously married and having no kids. I need to strategize and plan my next move. That woman is becoming a real nuisance. James doesn't pay me enough to deal with her constant maltreatment. Despite being told repeatedly that he won't talk to her, she keeps pushing. What annoys me most is that she cheated on him, got pregnant, and now wants James to ignore all that and come back to her. She's delusional. James just texted me that she somehow got his phone number in Scotland and called him. He wants me to get a restraining order, but it's tough to get one without a threat of physical violence. I'm trying to convince a judge, but I've warned James not to get his hopes up. A few weeks had passed since I met James Carter, and he had already come to my house for dinner 3 times. On Saturday, he took Sophie and me for a walk and picnic, and we had a great time. We visited Fort William National Park, walked some trails, and Sophie rode on James's shoulders for a bit. We had lunch at the Ladies' View Cafe, then went to Glenfinnan Viaduct, where we took pictures for him to send to his parents. That night, after Sophie was sound asleep, we made love for the first time. I was nervous since he was the first man I had been with since my divorce. We spent the night and woke up together the next morning. Jim called to give me updates on my divorce. My ex-wife still doesn't seem to grasp that I have no interest in reconciling with her, especially after she had a child with another man. "Jim, what the hell is going on?" I asked. He hesitated briefly before replying. "I wish I knew. I've been trying to get her to sign the papers and finalize everything, but no luck." Jim continued. "I think we need to move to Plan B." "What's Plan B?" I asked, uncertain of his next move. "I'm going back to court to file for a different reason. I'll explain the situation with the child to the judge and see if that pushes things forward," Jim explained. "I could file for another reason," Jim added, "but it doesn't make much sense since you're the one who left. It should only take a year in New York, but a judge might view it differently because you left." "What about Plan A? Irreconcilable differences. Wasn't that the right approach?" I questioned. "That's what I thought," Jim replied. "But the judge brought up the idea of you coming home and doing counseling. I told her you have a job in another country, and she asked when you're returning to the US. "Oh, for heaven's sake, just get me a divorce," I said, exasperated. "I don't care how, just do it." "Are you coming back?" Jim asked, sounding concerned. "Not while I'm still married to her," I responded firmly. I could have sworn I heard Jim mutter, "Crap." "Jim, make it happen, okay?" I urged him. "I'm working on it, Nat," Jim assured me. I called James's mother to find out where he was, and she let slip that he was in Scotland. Now I just need to find him, go there, and fix things. I believe I can work it out by talking to James. We were married for 5 years. When I started seeing Roger, I admit Roger was a mistake, but I felt single with James always at the hospital. We had talked a lot about starting a family, and when I told James I was pregnant, he was thrilled. He helped paint and decorate the baby's room, constantly bringing home new things, even a baseball glove, saying he'd teach our child, boy or girl, to play baseball. James will realize leaving us was a mistake. He'll love the baby when he holds her, I'm sure of it. Lately, Roger has been avoiding me. He doesn't answer my calls, and when I went to the school, he ran away as soon as he saw me. I wonder if his wife knows about us. That might explain it. I need to find out exactly where James is in Scotland. Then, I'll get on a plane and go to him. The hospital in Langholm called, asking for my help with a backlog of surgeries. Their orthopedic doctor was out with cancer, and surgeries had been piling up for a month. I agreed to come in for 3 days to help catch up. As I was getting ready to leave for Langholm on my motorcycle, I got another call. There was an emergency. A young man had been in a motorcycle accident, hitting a car at high speed. He was severely injured, and if a surgeon didn't act fast, he might lose both arms. Just as I was about to head out, Constable Sarah Kelly arrived in a police car. "The hospital called us to get you there quickly," she said. With no helicopter available, I jumped in the car, and we sped to Langholm, covering the 27 kilometers in minutes. She dropped me off at the hospital with a quick, "Go save a life." I rushed to the emergency room, examined the young man, and started preparing for surgery. He was just 18. I spent 11 hours reattaching his arms, while the neurosurgeon handled his head injuries, and the plastic surgeon worked on his face. When it was over, I was exhausted, needing the restroom, food, and rest. It was the most stressful day since I found out about Nat's affair. I met with the scheduling nurse and reviewed the plan for the next few days. 8 surgeries, 2 per day. It was going to be tough, especially since I hadn't performed surgery in over a month, but I decided to push through. The Scots had been good to me, and I owed them. The nurse mentioned they'd need my help every 2 weeks to keep up with surgeries, and I agreed to it. After finishing my work, I realized I had no way back to Braymore, so I called Sarah. Half an hour later, she arrived in a police car, her blonde hair in a ponytail. She looked beautiful, and I couldn't help but wonder what I should do. 4 months later, after seeing my last patient of the day, I sent Nicole home and began tidying up the office. Suddenly, I heard the door open. Surprised, I called out, "We're closed," but a familiar voice responded, "Hi, James." I looked up and was startled to see Nat standing there. "Nat, how did you find me?" I asked, my voice laced with disbelief. "It took some time, but I did." "You look good," she replied, her eyes scanning me. I sat down, trying to mask my unease. "Thanks. What do you want, Nat?" She seemed different. Motherhood had softened her features. "I want you to come home," she said, her tone both hopeful and pleading. Anger surged through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. After taking a deep breath, I responded, "Why do you think I'd ignore the consequences of your affair and the child you had with that guy? I'm not going to pretend everything's okay. You can't just have fun and ignore the fallout. I'm not the type to accept you having another man's baby." Nat's gaze dropped to the floor. "James, you need to come home. I need you and your daughter." My patience snapped. "Seriously? I don't have a daughter. You and your boyfriend have one. Let him handle it." "Go home." Her voice wavered as she pleaded. "But we were married for 5 years and I love you. You know you love me too. Come back." I looked at her, my anger barely contained. "If you really loved me, why were you with him? Explain that. You were never around, and I was lonely. Roger was there and we talked a lot," she admitted, her voice small. "Oh, so you were just fine with him? When did you forget we weren't supposed to be having fun with others?" I shot back. Nat struggled to find the words. "Can you just think about it? I miss you and know you'd be a great father." I was stunned by her audacity. Just then, Sarah walked in, looking effortlessly beautiful in tight jeans and a sleeveless blouse. Without hesitation, I went over to her, kissed her, and wrapped my arms around her. "Sarah, this is Nat. She found me here in Scotland," I said. Sarah sized Nat up quickly, then turned to me. "James, we need to leave for dinner with my parents at 6. "Nat's just leaving," I said firmly. "We've said all we needed to," but Nat wasn't ready to leave. "James, we need to talk seriously about what's going on," she insisted, her voice trembling. Sarah stepped in. "Nat, we have to go. James and I need to hit the road. My parents value punctuality. I'm sure you understand." Sarah gave Nat a stern look. If this were a pub fight, the crowd would be buzzing. I wasn't going to entertain Nat's pleas. She was involved with another man and had a child with him. I sympathized with the child, but not with Nat. She should have considered the consequences before her affair. My lawyer, Jim, had informed me about the court proceedings, and the divorce was nearly final. Nat would get the house and our savings, totaling over $80,000. It was a costly lesson, but I wasn't rushing to replace Nat. I planned to stay in Scotland for a few more months, work as a local doctor, and figure out my next steps. Life, however, doesn't always go as planned. Things didn't go as planned. The woman with the blonde hair interrupted me. I left the baby with my parents, hoping that showing James what he was missing would make him come back and try to be a family. I've been working hard to lose the pregnancy weight and fit back into my size 6 jeans. I even brought James's favorite perfume, but that woman showed up, and I could smell her Chanel perfume. She better not think I'll give up without a fight. My hotel room is tiny, barely room to move between the bed and the desk, and the TV is an old tube model. How do people live like this? I need to find something to eat and call my mom. She's not happy about taking care of the baby and gets a lot of questions from friends who don't know I adopted the child. I don't think she's correcting them. What the heck? This woman actually came to Scotland. How did she find me? I suspect one of my talkative relatives let it slip. She should have listened to her lawyer. The divorce is nearly final. There's no turning back. We're finished. I was really glad to see Sarah. She mentioned meeting my parents, though I'm not sure if she was serious. I took her out for dinner, brought her back to my modest apartment, and made her breakfast the next morning. Last night, after dinner, I walked around the village. It's nothing special, and I don't understand what James sees in this place. They call restaurants pubs, which, it turns out, is short for brothel. I learned James only works 3 days a week, and the locals shared quite a bit about him. Back at my hotel, run by Mary and Bill, Mary mentioned James was considered a local hero. She quickly realized who I was and excused herself. I overheard her and Bill talking quietly. The next morning, I went to James's clinic and was met by a teenager at the front desk. She clearly recognized me. I found out James wasn't in because it was surgery day at the Langholm Hospital. The doctor was booked all week, so I might need to return next Monday. I spent some time exploring the city and had bad coffee. The weather turned foggy, making the city seem even smaller. I had no idea where to wait or if James was staying with someone else. I decided to ask around for more information. I got a call from the police about an American woman asking for Dr. Carter. She was staying with Mary and Bill at their hotel. It was clear that this was Mrs. Carter, trying to convince James to return to Boston. We needed to handle this quickly. Mary informed me that Natalie Carter had visited the doctor's office, but James was in Langholm today for surgery. I had to get Mrs. Carter to leave James alone. Fortunately, Constable Sarah Kelly, a stunning woman known for her charm, is on my team. Sarah is transitioning from police work to studying law at Edinburgh University, where she's sure to succeed. I spoke with Mary and Bill, who had to close their bed and breakfast due to a safety violation. I told Mrs. Carter she had to leave immediately. Bill packed her things, refunded her money, and booked her a room at the nearest hotel in Fort William. Mrs. Carter was understandably furious, but Bill knew this was necessary for our town. The hotel just kicked me out, claiming they had to close due to a health inspector. Now I'm being sent to Fort William, wherever that is, and it's pouring rain. I'm really fed up with Scotland. My mom's calling, asking when I'm coming home. To top it off, I just got an email reminding me my maternity leave ends in a week, and I'll have to return to work. Here's the deal. I wanted James to meet my parents because he's the best guy I've ever dated. He has high standards and sticks to them, even with an unfaithful wife like me. The issue is, I'll have to break up with him soon since I'm moving to Edinburgh in August for law school. I need to settle in and prepare for my new life. Plus, I won't be able to live celibate in Edinburgh. I enjoy relationships, and it wouldn't be fair to keep seeing him while being involved with other men. Knowing he won't be seeing other women makes it even more complicated, so I think it's best to end things as soon as possible. I got some key info from the Braemore Gossip Network, or BGN. Sarah's goal is to get into law school, and I've heard from Nicole that she's been accepted and will start in August. Sarah is outgoing, and I know I'm not the right match for her in the long run. I just end up waiting for the day she'd be with someone else, which would eventually end things for me. For my own peace of mind, I need to remember our relationship is short-term and just for fun. I won't say anything foolish like declaring my love. Besides, there are people I'd like to get to know better. The doctor the Department of Health promised to send hasn't materialized. I haven't heard anything yet, so I called the hospital in Langholm. They said they'd update me, but weeks have passed with no word. Sarah and I parted on good terms, knowing our relationship was only temporary and just friends with benefits. It's been a few months since Sarah Kelly left for Edinburgh. I'd been busy with work and Sophie, so my social life had taken a back seat. I was surprised when James invited us to the fair in Fort William for the weekend. With Sarah gone, I figured he was lonely and wanted company, and I was in need of some male attention myself. Sophie was thrilled and immediately began packing, even though we weren't leaving until Saturday afternoon. When Saturday arrived, I had forgotten James had a motorcycle and expected him to show up in my car. Instead, he arrived in an Audi sedan, courtesy of a short-term lease arranged by the mayor of Braemore. It was more comfortable for his weekly trips to Langholm. Sophie climbed into the back seat, but I made her get out to install her baby seat. The fair was a blast. Sophie enjoyed the rides, cotton candy and junk food, and held James's hand throughout. He seemed to enjoy the day, and after the fair, we went out for a meal and returned to my house. I invited James in, and Sophie, already in her pajamas, dragged him to her room to read her a bedtime story. He returned half an hour later, saying she was a heavy sleeper due to the food and fresh air. I handed him a glass of wine. "You've earned this. How do you manage everything?" he replied. "I don't overthink it. I just do it. I can't remember life before Sophie. She's everything." He was puzzled. "How could your ex-husband refuse her?" "Some men aren't cut out to be fathers. He's one of them." I sipped my wine. "If she were mine, I couldn't handle it. Sophie is my everything." James took a sip. "But that doesn't mean I don't want more. What do you want?" We talked late into the night about his past betrayal and his ex-wife's infidelity. He wished she had been honest about not wanting to stay married. Now divorced, he was savoring his newfound freedom and determined not to repeat the past. He wanted to be sure of his choices in the future. Meanwhile, Sophie seemed to be warming up to him as a potential new father figure. "I wanted to update you. Your divorce has been finalized for a while now. I've sent you the original decree and have a copy on file if you need it. You're single in Scotland and there are risks involved." "Jim, I really appreciate it," you replied gratefully. "Just pay my bill when you get it," Jim said. "I was worried when Nat showed up here." "What was she thinking?" You shook your head. "Her family was furious and told her to get her act together. She came to give me one last chance, but when I turned her down, she returned home. She's still struggling as a single mom." "And what about the baby's father?" Jim asked, concerned. "He's dealing with his own issues and is ignoring Nat," you explained. "He's afraid she'll ask for child support, which he can't afford." Jim scoffed. "That's ridiculous. Are you coming back soon or staying in Scotland?" "I'm not sure," you admitted. "It's different here, but I like it a lot. I met a great woman who could make me very happy. She's a nurse practitioner with a 4-year-old daughter." "What?" Jim exclaimed. "Yes," you continued. "She's smart, beautiful, and a fantastic mom. The child isn't mine, but she didn't deceive me like Nat did. Nat betrayed and lied to me. When I saw I wasn't the father, it hit me hard. That's when I knew the marriage was over and I had to leave Boston." "Well, you've definitely achieved that," Jim said with a nod. "Thanks for all your help," you replied, feeling a sense of closure. "James, it's time," Laura said, her voice urgent. "Oh no, I'll grab the bag now," I responded quickly, fetching the pre-packed bag from the closet and preparing to head to the car. I called the hospital to notify them we were on our way. My parents were already there, fussing as we arrived. Sophie hugged us both and said, "Bring me home a baby brother." I laughed while settling Laura in the car. The police had arranged a police escort to the hospital in Langholm. 9 hours later, our baby was born. I made a mental note that the next child might be the brother Sophie wanted. My parents and Sophie came to the hospital to meet the baby girl, Annabelle Marie Carter. Annabelle was unfazed by the attention, simply holding my finger while I held her. "That's right, I have the final say. I'm fortunate to have found a man who is committed to being a family man from the beginning. James has embraced the responsibility of being a husband and father. He's mine, but I'll share him with Sophie, Annabelle, and likely others. I can't understand women who don't recognize their good fortune. James's ex was foolish, and her mistake worked out in my favor. She messed up and lost him because of it. When James and I found each other, it was by sheer chance, but I'm grateful. I believe James feels the same way. We're a family now, and if anyone tries to come between us, I'll handle it as a Scottish wife and mother. I don't tolerate other women showing interest in my husband, including you, Sarah Kelly.